Hi everyone, so yesterday we had a 3.17 announcement live stream from GGG, and if you haven't seen it yet, this is a trailer running in the background here and it actually looks amazing. So I watched it live on stream with a lot of other people there reacting and talking about it. It definitely looks like a great expansion. They have revamped the Atlas, the endgame, new pinnacle bosses, an Atlas passive tree for all maps together. So there's a lot of stuff to unpack there, and I want to go through it a little bit and give the highlights a little bit. There will be more videos talking about the specifics of certain parts of that expansion, especially Atlas passive tree and also some builds that are looking quite promising, and I will cover those in some other videos. But here you can see some of the new bosses. So in total there are 4 new endgame bosses that are working a little bit similar to like the Elder and the Shaper, and there's also new currency items. So this time around there won't be any new skills, but they have revamped or buffed a lot of the underperforming skills, especially for bow builds and for spellcasters, in particular manual spellcasters, so that you do not really have to go for totems and for traps and mines and all these kind of things. And I just wanted to boost that kind of archetype a little bit. So the bottom line is lots of really cool stuff here, lots of nice updates to the endgame, and they have also simplified how the whole Atlas system works. Even though we might see this massive Atlas passive tree now and you might be a bit scared or something, it essentially works similar to the regular character passive tree. So the working mechanisms are essentially the same, and you just have like a bit more freedom of where to spend your points, and you get more of them. Basically the completion bonus of the maps have been replaced by giving you an extra point for this passive tree, and you can essentially spread out to the right league mechanics immediately that you want to play. So that is actually really cool, and there's a lot of really other like more new player friendly changes they made there to make it a more simplified system. So the way that the new endgame works is that Maven is still around, but similar to how you were able to choose this Maven witness on a map or not, you are now also able to pursue the Searing Flame and the Eater of Worlds. These are those 2 new bosses here, and they also have one of their sub bosses each. So essentially it's a bit like the Shaper Elder influence, where you try to pursue them and then the influence grows, so similar to the Conquerors, and then eventually you're gonna find one of these sub bosses and they drop a fragment that you can then use to start the encounter against one of the bigger bosses. So you can kind of like farm one or the other or both at the same time, and they all have like their special loot table with new uniques that are extremely powerful, and also new currency items that you can use to craft up to 2 different implicits on every piece of rare gear. So this is extremely powerful, but only works on non-influenced items. So they're trying to make like non-influenced items more interesting and more powerful, and I believe that this is most likely what most people will shoot for on their rare gear. So you probably only take like some of the really important influenced items now, something like elusive or tailwind boots might be interesting, or perhaps you're gonna have like this one very important mana reservation mod from Redeemer somewhere, these kind of things. But I think that overall influenced items will definitely lose a lot of their value, and you're rather gonna go for regular rares that you can then put those implicit modifiers on, that you can actually quite deterministically craft. So there are different tiers, and then there's new crafting currencies you're going to see in a moment that you can use to influence those modifiers, change them around, and essentially get what you want on every single piece of item. This does not include unique items, so those still have to get implicits through corruptions. So there is a bit of like a distinction there, but it seems like those new modifiers are powerful enough to make most non-influenced items better than most influenced items, I believe. Cool part about fighting these new endgame bosses is that you can actually roll the invitation similar to a Maven's invitation, and they increase the rewards and also the power of the bosses, and you can try to min-max the invitation a little bit for your own build, so that you don't really have many crazy modifiers you can't deal with, similar to how you run maps. and this makes it more rewarding for very powerful builds while staying accessible for weaker builds. And this is actually a really great change. There's also stuff like this that you can find. These called altars, and they buff the boss a little bit, or they give you like another small bonus, or a rather big bonus by buffing them. So you can make it even harder and even more rewarding, and potentially get a lot out of these maps, but you don't have to. So this is actually a really cool system, I believe. This was definitely one of the problems that some of the other endgame bosses had, that they were simply too difficult and too powerful for many more casual players. And now you have the option to run an easier version of them and still getting some rewards at the very least. So this is actually a great system, I believe. Here are the Void Stones. So the Void Stones are basically replacing the Watch Stones, and you get a total of 4 of them from defeating certain endgame bosses. So it is a much simpler way of acquiring them, and you don't have to micromanage them all the time and putting them in different regions. All the Atlas regions are gone. It's only one Atlas now, and as you can see here, the maps progress towards higher tiers, and adding those Watch Stones, or the Void Stones rather, similar to the Watch Stones, raises the tier of the maps until everything is T16, so that you have the entire Atlas with just one Atlas passive tree, everything tier 16, you can run any map, and you have 12 favorite slots, so that you can really run and target farm the right maps that you want, either a variety of them, or you just put all 12 slots on the same map to then get essentially every other map drop, be that particular map. So it does allow a lot of freedom in what you're farming and which map you really like. So here we see a sneak peek of the Atlas passive tree. It is about to be released very soon, they said, and we're gonna have like the full picture. But in general, this looks like it's gonna just have like most of the Atlas passives that we already know from the different regions distributed across this whole tree here, and then you just start pathing around to grab whatever you want. They also mentioned that, for example, for the early end game, you can take extra nodes that give you more map drops, for example, so that you don't have to really juice up your maps and try to get more map drops, but instead you can just take those, and then as you progress and become stronger, and you don't really need, to build up such a large map pool anymore at some point, because you just get lots of drops naturally, you can replace those and get, for example, more League mechanic encounters and these kind of things. So it becomes more rewarding progressively as you go deeper and deeper into the Atlas, and then you have more points and you have basically all the maps you'll ever need. So this sounds like an extremely cool system, so I'm very excited to try this myself and let's just see how it feels. I'm sure there might be some tweaks coming up at some point, maybe in the patch or maybe in the next, but overall this whole system definitely makes more sense than it did before, in my opinion. So when you look at this, I'm sure there's also going to be some kind of like more core League mechanics that they kind of force you to path through. So you kind of want to grab them on the side, and then there's probably like some others that are maybe a bit more advanced that you can path to on the edges of the tree. So we have to see about the exact distribution of all the passives, but yeah, probably there's going to be some kind of like different tiers and different complexities of those League mechanics that are distributed in certain areas of the tree. So here are some examples of those Eldritch implicit mods that you can craft. So for example, there's fire.multi, there's res, there is physical converted to something, there's flat spell damage and all these kind of things. So we don't have the full list of modifiers yet, but they indeed seem quite powerful. So either you replace one of these implicits that you already have, one for example a ring, or you add a whole new one, especially to items that do not have any implicits. And some of these definitely seem to be quite build defining to the point where you definitely want to go for it. Here are those new currency items to make those implicits. So these are called the Eldritch Embers or the Eldritch Ichors, and they can drop in any map here, at least the lesser ones, and then the tier 2 and tier 3 they can drop from running those influenced maps, so when you pursue them and you try to fight one of the sub bosses. And then finally you have the highest tier that you can find, the tier 4, that drops from those bosses directly. And then there are 2 more tiers that you can get from an even other currency, where you can upgrade one and lower the tier of another at the same time. So you can try to move from tier 4 to tier 5 while removing the tier of one or the other, and then again upgrade again to tier 6 and removing the other. So like this, you'll be able to max out at a tier 6 and a tier 4 mod at the same time. You can have one of each of them, and they have different mod pools basically. So one is kind of like a prefix, one is kind of like a suffix implicit. So this corresponds to like the theme of, they are kind of going against each other and kind of in conflict. As you can see later, there's this called Orb of Conflict that allows you to raise the tier of one of these while lowering the other. Here's also some other examples of very powerful implicits. Rage on hit with attacks is very powerful. You have lots of flat damage. You have cannot regen life is very useful, especially for Maven encounters. So there's lots of really good stuff here. Here are some examples of cold dot multi and fire conversion. So you can definitely see that the impact is really large. Some of these implicits are actually going to be bigger than some explicit mods. So here's one of these examples of applying those orbs to an item. So you get the first one, then you get the other, and then you can use this Orb of Conflict to raise one and lower the other. So like this, you try to get to tier 6 on the endgame items, and then try to replace the one that was lowered with another tier 4. But I assume it's going to be very expensive because those orbs are not going to drop like candy. I assume just the lower ones are going to be quite easy to achieve, especially tier 1 and tier 2. So they want you to have the ability to get those potentially build enabling mods quite early, so you can just throw them on your item. And I believe the lower tier is going to be cheap, but the higher tiers are probably going to be very expensive because they're going to be used for end game items. So people are going to pay a lot for them. And also here are the 3 new types of currency they have teased recently. The new Chaos, Exalt and Annulment Orbs, which is also connected to this whole system, where if one of the mods from one of the bosses is higher on the item and you have 2 different implicits, then you can either reroll the prefixes or the suffixes, or you can slam a prefix or a suffix, or you can annul a prefix or a suffix. So this allows you a great degree of deterministic crafting. I believe all of these are also going to be quite expensive because of the possibility to craft endgame items with them, but it is definitely a very cool system. But I think the idea of being able to directly manipulate one side of an item while keeping the other one intact is definitely really awesome, as you have seen with the meta crafting mods. So having these currencies that directly influence that is actually really cool. Connected to this, I should mention that the Scourge currencies are not going core, so we don't have the ability to change corrupted items, we don't have the ability to easily 6-link stuff anymore. So this is something that will go away, but maybe we're gonna see some updates to that in the future, or maybe they will make a return later in another league, but for now this is out. Here are some of the new unique items they have shown. So there's, for example, some skill gem based amulet here that seems very interesting. Raising the level of all skills, giving lots of quality and some mana reservation efficiency. This can be potentially quite awesome for certain builds that rely on lots of quality. There is the Dissolution of the Flesh, which I find very interesting. So here basically you have to not take damage for 2 seconds to heal, but you also get lots of extra life. So the idea is that you use your life reserve and make sure that you have some moments where you don't take any damage to heal up. Very interesting item. I will definitely try to make a build around this, especially because it can give you lots of extra tankiness. Here is the Polaric Devastation. This is a ring, so it gives you the new debuff Cover Enemies in Frost, which works similar to the Cover Enemy in Ash. So that is quite interesting, I believe, to have like a new tool for cold builds. Here's Ceaseless Feast. It has a new debuff called Corrosion that eats away on the armor and the evasion of your target, and once you have done that enough, it can give you Endurance and Frenzy Charge on hit. So that is really cool. I believe that's going to be very useful for attack type builds and even bow builds to easily include some endurance charges. It also allows you to eat away on a boss's defense so that you can deal more damage to those over time. So that is definitely a very interesting item, I believe. And here are probably the highlights of the entire league in terms of unique items. These are the Forbidden Flame and the Forbidden Flesh jewels that will drop directly from those new endgame bosses. And they have the ability to give you an ascendancy node from another ascendancy of the same class you're playing. So the way this works is that you have to find both that specify the same ascendancy node, and they have the class requirement. So for example, as a ranger, you'll be able to roll any ranger ascendancy node. So here's an example. So Master Surgeon is a Pathfinder node, and you have to be ranger, so you can't get off-class ascendancies. And for example, if you're playing a raider or a deadeye, you will be able to get this master surgeon node by equipping both of these matching jewels at the same time. And this will work similar for every single other class, for every single ascendancy. And they didn't give us the specifics, but apparently there's also a special system for the Scion to get similar benefits. So very exciting, but I believe there's going to be very endgame, because first of all, you have to find the right class, the right ascendancy node, the matching piece, and obviously some of those going to be way more popular than others. So for example, having 3 full flasks all the time on something like a ranger when you're not playing a pathfinder is extremely powerful, is extremely sought after. Or for example, occultists with profane bloom, those on-death explosions for chaos damage might be one of those cases. And I believe there's going to be many other examples of extremely powerful ascendancy nodes that people will try to find to put into their build and get lots of power out of it. So I believe those are going to be very expensive, but similar to, for example, Watcher's Eyes, I believe there's also going to be some quite powerful, very budget choices that people do not generally seek out that much, and you will be able to stick those into your build anyway and get some nice little effect out of it. They also talked about the sextants and how they work now with the void stones. So in general, the working mechanism is not really changed. What you need to know is that all the sextants have been combined into one tier that you will find mostly in the higher tier maps, because this way we'll have access to the void stones. And then there is still the elevated sextants that you can find from the Maven. And the only thing that has really changed is that the NEM 3 farming and the NEM 4 farming has been removed, because they said it was busted, and I have to agree. And they also streamlined those mods a little bit and added a few new ones and these kind of things. But in general, it has the same mechanism as before. But also they like you to strategize a little bit around those sextant modifiers, and they give you a new item called the Surveyor's Compass that you can get for 1 Chaos Orb, or you can also find. And this can store sextant modifiers for later use, so that when you roll a really good one but you don't want to use it just now, you can store it like this, similar to a beast, and then you can even trade it away if you don't want to use it. Another cool change, especially for the early end game, is the Commander Kirak Atlas missions. So it's not Zana this time around, it's Kirak, and he has these missions for you that can open, for example, directly from your hideout. You don't randomly find them anymore, and you don't have to go through those multiple layers of maps to to complete those missions. And instead he has like much more rewarding missions. So typically you will find certain league mechanics, or find certain items or certain bosses. So all the stuff will show up much more. And there's also these new items that you can find that can reset his inventory, so you can try to find or buy maps from him at a good price that have, for example, boss encounters, have maybe delirium on them, have some league mechanics on them. So there is stuff like that is like directly on the map, so that again you can store them for later use or trade them or anything you want. So overall, really cool stuff. He's also those so-called scouting reports that reroll his missions. Yeah, what do you need to know about the Conquerors from Cyrus? So all those have become essentially like Guardian maps, like Shaper and Elder. So it's the same thing. You can find them with a certain boss on the map, and they also still drop their loot, and they also drop a fragment that you can then use to fight an Awakener 8 Cyrus and potentially get those items as well. The Awakened gems have been moved to Maven encounters, so apparently there's different tiers. So the lesser ones drop from those boss encounters on Maven, and the greater ones drop from Maven directly. So she's still going to be part of the end game. So this is pretty much it for the patch update. There's also the Arc Nemesis League here that they introduced. So the way this works is rather simple. So you will find these statues in a map, and you can encounter a like a rare enemy there. So you can do this up to 4 times per map, and you find these random items that can buff those rare monsters. So they get like special new abilities and buffs and become stronger in some way, but also give you certain rewards, and you can stack up those rewards, and then when you encounter the next statue, you will have the previous buff and the previous reward, and you can add one more, and you can do this up to 4 times to get more and more rewards as you play through the map, and do this more often. Apparently there's also gonna be some recipes, so you can combine certain mods to then give them yet another new mod and more rewards. And there's also gonna be like some combos involved in which modifiers you wanna stack to get more out of it. So we have to see exactly like when the league launches, what you can do with that. But overall the system seems to be fairly straightforward. You probably don't even want to do it like every single map. You have this little inventory here where you can store these items and then, you know, just stack them up for a little while and then do them for a few maps in a row and potentially have some cool recipes that give you lots of extra loot. So pretty straightforward. So you have like a little bit like a metamorph kind of thing. So build your own rare enemy and they become harder and harder and more rewarding as you go. And then you can get, you know, some extra juice out of the maps. And lastly, they introduced 2 new stash tabs, one for flasks, one for gems. Quite useful, I believe, but I'm not sure if they are really necessary. The good part is that you can now have affinities for gems and for flasks on your stash tabs. So for example, when you have your typical quad tab for mapping where you just dump all your items, you can just put the affinity for your quality flasks and then throw them all in there immediately. Same with the gems. So this is actually going to be a huge quality of life because you don't have to like sort them, you know, that one by one anymore, and you just have them all there in one place. And that also wraps up the video. So I wanted to give a bit of an overview here of what's going on in the patch. You can also watch the whole live stream yourself. There's also the Q&A from Chris Wilson and CGD that goes a bit deeper into some of those topics and explains a bit more to details. And obviously I'll be covering a lot of other topics here as well in some other videos very soon. So stay tuned for that. Hope you enjoyed my overview and my thoughts here. Let me know what you think about the leak and the announcement so far. I think it looks really cool. I'm really looking forward to playing it myself, and we're gonna probably all have a lot of fun with it, I believe. So hope you enjoyed it. Hope to see you around in the league. I'll be streaming and I will be making content for you guys. See you guys next time.